Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It doesn't sound like anything that could happen in Canada, but it has, and it's happening again. A book ban, this time in Alberta. Premier Danielle Smith's education ministry implemented an order that would mandate all school boards to pull books and other materials that include explicit sexual content by October 1st. Demetrios Nicolaides ensured the move wasn't a book ban, but rather about setting standards he claimed were nowhere to be found up until that July order was introduced. That was until he announced a pause on the move on Tuesday afternoon, ordering all school boards to stop the removal of the books, with not much of an explanation as to why. Well, the question now remains, is the pause temporary, or will the province go full steam ahead on the controversial move some critics coin as literary censorship? I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to Sean Amato, Alberta politics reporter for CityNews, who's been keeping up with the fast-moving pace of this story and the pretty notorious reaction. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I think a lot of people are wondering, where did the idea of this so-called book ban come from? What sparked this move for the Smith government?
Well, to hear them tell it came from concerned parents. But a lot of people have been asking for more detail about that. Which parents? Where did they find them? How many schools were they in? And really all we're getting from the government is that, they were found in schools, public schools in Edmonton and in Calgary. We're not sure how widespread these ones are. The government gave, I believe it was 4 or 5 examples of, sort of the extreme examples of graphic novels with graphic images in them, portraying some nudity and some sexual content and that sort of thing. So that's sort of where it started, at least where the government says it started. But we all know, people who follow politics in North America will know that, book banning, and that term in and of itself is controversial. But this is something that's rippling through conservative North America, including, conservative states in the United States, where book titles are being pulled off the shelves. Parents are concerned about the content of those books. Many of those books have, LGBTQ2S plus content in them. So there's an element of that as well, of people saying, well, this is actually coming from a place of hate, not so much a place of concerned parents. And that's a debate that I don't think is going to end anytime soon.
So the timeline of this so-called book ban has been pretty dynamic. It started kind of in July. That's when things started to really take shape in the Albertan government. Bring us up to date a little bit. What has it been like, and how have the twists and turns taken form?
Yeah, well, the latest thing that happened Tuesday is the government sort of stepped back from their initial policy. They say that the ministerial order is going to be rewritten, that the premier said that there was miscommunication in how it was written. But if you read the actual text in the ministerial order, as I have and other experts have done, other critics have done, it was very widespread. It was very it included texts of sexual descriptions, that sort of thing. The premier, the latest thing that she said is that they're going to be targeting pornographic images as opposed to, some classic novels that have mentions of sex or sexual encounters or that sort of thing. So it is a dynamic thing. We're still not sure when that order is going to be rewritten, when it's going to be made public, exactly what it's going to say. But the latest that happened on Tuesday is Alberta's premier says it was a miscommunication. We need to rewrite it for clarity's sake.
Right. So kind of this all kind of blew up because of the Edmonton Public School Board releasing the list of more than 200 titles that they plan to take off their library shelves, including some iconic ones like Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and of course, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Tell me a little bit about the books on that list that kind of sparked that and why exactly they were taken off the shelves originally.
Well, that was the issue with this ministerial order, is we were hearing from the government that what they wanted was graphic, pornographic images taken off the shelves. But again, if you read that order, it was a lot more widespread than that. So the speculation for months has been what books are going to be included. The government says they never really intended for classics to be targeted. They didn't want The Handmaid's Tale taken off the shelves. But as many have pointed out, that is what was written in the order. It even something as, maybe PG-13 as somebody touching the breasts of a female was explicitly written in the order that that's explicit sexual content and that needs to be taken out of schools. So for weeks, we've been hearing speculation of what are these lists going to look like? What is the interpretation of this order going to be? Is it going to wrap up books like The Handmaid's Tale in it? I did a story with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association a few weeks ago where they said, the way we read this, the way we interpret this order is that a lot of those classics will be caught up in this. And they called it a book ban. The government, it's interesting to note, is still saying it's not a book ban. It's not a book ban. But most people, including journalists, disagree with that description.
Now, Margaret Atwood, the author of The Handmaid's Tale, not taking too kindly to the original fact that her book was taken off the shelves. What was her reaction like?
Well, she said that the government was treating, 17-year-olds like babies, who couldn't handle, a little bit of any mention of sex, sort of thing. She also referred to, the content of The Handmaid's Tale of, this government sort of dictating to the people exactly what they need to read, what they need to see, that sort of thing. The premier was asked about Margaret Atwood on Tuesday. She said that, I would encourage Margaret Atwood to take a look at some of the more graphic images that we were targeting. She actually listed some of the sexual acts that were depicted in those images and is essentially saying, some people think that these should be in schools, but we clearly do not. And so they're going to go back and they're going to rewrite that order and try to come up with some clarification. But the vast majority of people are looking at that order and saying, the way that it was written, it includes books like Margaret Atwood's classic.
And Margaret Atwood kind of took her own response to this. She took it into her own hands and she wrote a bit of a spin-off novel, if you will. What was that like? What was that about?
She was talking about, buy the book you can before it gets burned in Alberta and this sort of thing. I think a lot of what she was writing was tongue in cheek. But she was taking the position that no matter what the government says, this is a book ban. This is overreaching. This is going too far. I would be curious to interview Margaret Atwood and say, what about these extreme examples? Because even the NDP in the province here said today, on Tuesday, that, if the government wanted to get rid of some of these explicit examples, they should have done that. But the way that they wrote this widespread order, it was a complete failure on the part of the government. The NDP says it was a waste of time. It's causing undue stress on teachers. Interestingly enough, teachers in Alberta and the government are going through a rough patch in contract negotiations, and we could have a teacher's strike or a lockout any day now in Alberta. So there's a lot going on here right now, and the NDP says this was, completely silly for the government to do it in this way, and do it at this time where parents, teachers, administrators, everybody has more than enough to deal with the start of the school year.
Lots of tension going on there. Do you think Margaret Atwood's comments or her kind of, her smart remarks, do you think they played into any role about the pause in this move? Do you think they kind of contributed to any sentiment?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they did. I mean, there were political scientists that I was interviewing today out of Calgary told me that the New York Times called him this morning and they wanted to interview him about this. So there's no question that this has become an international story, that lots of people outside of Alberta are looking at this. Much of the reaction is not positive on the part of the Alberta government. But for people that don't know the dynamics of Alberta politics, to some extent, the government here doesn't care. The government here is very focused on rural Alberta. That is, a far conservative sort of constituency because that's where they hold their seats. That's where their power balance is. This whole issue of separation is also something that's sort of raging in Alberta right now. There is another far right party, the Alberta Republicans, who are saying, no, the government shouldn't have backed away from this. The government should be banning a bunch of these books. That group, that political party, is also pitching Alberta separation on top of it. So it's very interesting to see, what happens outside of Alberta or what happens in the big cities of Edmonton and Calgary. But the government here always has to be very focused on what its rural conservative base wants, because if they lose that base, they lose government and it's over for them.
We know Premier Smith is currently doing her stops on the Alberta Next panel. What are some other initiatives the Smith government is looking at? Anything as controversial besides the separation, or how is it going for her?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of controversial topics in there. Everything from an Alberta pension plan that public surveys have said Albertans do not want. They want to stay in the CPP. There's a proposal for an Alberta police force. A lot of people, municipal leaders, have said, we don't want that. We want the RCMP. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. There's also some policies there about, Alberta collecting income tax and then giving it to Ottawa as opposed to going the other way around. There's a controversial policy in there about perhaps Alberta approving immigrants. So people that want to come to Alberta would have to go through the Canadian process and then a provincial process. And the government is even saying one of the possibilities is to say, okay, you want to come to Alberta, you want to immigrate here, you're not approved by Alberta, therefore you cannot have provincial services. So you can't go to schools, you can't go to hospitals because we're not approving of you. Now, whether that is legal, whether that is something that's going to happen, who knows? It's probably not going to happen, but this is just an example of how the government has to pander to the far-right rural Albertan who is frustrated by things like, the deal that we have with Ottawa, the amount of immigrants coming in the country. We have housing shortages here. We have doctor shortages here. We have school shortages here. So there's a lot going on for the Alberta government. The question is, are they losing support where they need to keep support? And I don't think they are.
You bring up a great point. We know Premier Smith has been going through this year with the health scandal and contract talks and stuff like that. How badly does this hurt her government, and where does her government stand right now in the polls? I know you mentioned how important it is to have the backing of rural Albertans, but how does this impact her standing right now?
It's a great question, and be interested to see some updated polls. But what we've been seeing through this health scandal, through some of these more controversial policies that are being pitched by the Alberta Next panel, is the UCP is still strong in Alberta, that if an election were to be held today, they would win another majority. They would hold on to many rural seats they have. They may even gain a couple seats in the suburbs of Edmonton and Calgary. So while a lot of things that the Alberta government is doing is not popular with Margaret Atwood, it's maybe not popular with the New York Times, it may not be popular with left-leaning media out of Toronto or these sorts of places, it appears that a lot of what she's doing is popular with her base. It's popular with the people that she needs to win over and their support she needs to hold in order to hold government. So, a lot of people from the outside will look at this and say, why is the government doing this? This seems weird. This seems crazy. This seems far right. Where is this coming from? But a lot of it is coming from a calculated risk that she's taking of how does she hold on to her base and how does she hold on to power in Alberta. It's interesting to note that the last few conservative premiers in Alberta were actually not removed by voters. They were removed by their party. Because of controversial policies in their party, there can be a split in the Conservatives. United Conservatives, of course, are an amalgamation of two legacy conservative parties. So she's trying to hold that party together. She's trying to hold that conservative coalition together. So that dictates a lot of what she's doing. And I don't think she cares that much about what Margaret Atwood thinks.
Other premiers like Ontario's Doug Ford have on occasion publicly admitted some of their policies didn't work and went ahead to repeal them. Do you see the Smith government doing the same given all this backlash, or is this a policy that they intend on keeping after kind of refining it a little bit more?
Yeah, there was no apology coming from the premier. On Friday, she doubled down and said, if school boards need us to hold their hands and walk them through this policy, we're willing to do that. So she was quite aggressive in battling back against that criticism, condescending even to those school boards. And even on Tuesday, there was no, we're sorry about this. It was, we were trying to do the right thing all along. You guys, everybody else, misunderstood what we were saying. The NDP says that's very arrogant of them to act like that when clearly they were the ones in the wrong. That's what the NDP is saying. It's interesting to note the premier, when she came in, she said, I will be a Ralph Klein sort of conservative, mentioning the former Alberta conservative premier who would make mistakes and who would apologize and even issued some tearful apologies in his premiership. She said she was going to be the kind of premier that would apologize when things didn't go right. But she hasn't been, frankly. She has not apologized for things in the healthcare scandal. She has not apologized for ballooning class sizes, those sorts of things. She does, I guess, in a way, do little pivots like she did today. But in terms of apologizing or saying the Alberta government made a mistake, we haven't seen a whole lot of that from Danielle Smith and her government.
All right, well, we'll be watching closely over the next few days to see just exactly how the Alberta government tends to refine and get a hold of this order once again. Sean Amato, Alberta politics reporter for CityNews, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And that was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.